The world was turning to dust. For as long as the people of the Red Rock had lived in the shadow of the great, sun-baked cliffs, the valley had been their mother. It had provided the herds of long-horned bison they hunted, the sweet roots the women dug from the earth, and the clear, steady stream that gave them water. But the mother was dying. The rains had failed for 2 summers. The stream was now a dry, cracked scar of mud and stone. The lush grasses of the plains had withered into a yellow, brittle carpet that crunched underfoot. The great herds, wise in the ways of the world, had followed the ghost of water and moved on, vanishing to the east. Now, only the wind lived in the valley, a hot, mournful voice that carried the smell of dust and despair. Hunger was no longer a visitor in their caves. It was a permanent resident. The clan's food pits were empty. The children were listless, their bellies swollen over stick-thin limbs. The hunters returned day after day with nothing but the dust on their faces and the grim set of failure in their jaws. Grak, the clan leader, a man whose strength and certainty had always been as solid as the rock behind them, now carried a new weight in his shoulders. It was the weight of watching his people waste away. There were 38 of them left. Each morning, Grak would stand at the mouth of the main cave and look out at his dying world. And each morning, his gaze, and the gaze of his entire clan, would be drawn to the one place that was not brown and dying. To the west, their valley was blocked by a force of nature so vast and powerful it was not just a landmark, but a god. The river. They called it Akig, the Great Maw. It was not a river like their gentle stream had been. It was a monstrous, churning torrent of white water, wider than a man could throw a spear 3 times over. Born from the distant, snow-capped mountains that were always visible on the horizon, it smashed its way through the landscape, a permanent, roaring testament to the world's raw power. Its banks were steep cliffs in most places, and its water was a churning chaos of currents and rapids that could swallow a falling tree and spit out splinters a mile downstream. No one had ever crossed Akig. To enter its water was to give your spirit to the river god, and the god was always hungry. They had seen it happen. A great elk, pursued by wolves, had tried to leap into the water to escape and was immediately consumed, its strong legs useless against the current's might. Akig was the edge of their world. But beyond it, on the other side, was life. Paradise. The western bank was a tapestry of deep, lush greens. From their high cliffs, they could see forests thick with tall trees, meadows of grass so green it hurt the eyes, and most tantalizing of all, they could see animals. They could see herds of bison, larger than any they had ever hunted, grazing peacefully. They could see the swift, graceful movements of deer. The other side was not dying. It was thriving. It was a promise of survival, separated from them by an impassable god. Lor was a young man who felt the pull of that other shore more keenly than most. He was not a great hunter like Grak or a powerful brute like Borin, a man whose arrogance was as thick as his muscles. Lor was of a slighter build, and his strength was not in his arm, but in his eyes and his mind. He was an observer, a quiet watcher who saw the patterns others missed. While the hunters despaired, Lor watched the river. He spent his days perched on a high, precarious outcrop of rock that overlooked the widest part of the Great Maw. He watched the way the current flowed, the way it eddied and swirled around the great black rocks that jutted from the water like teeth. He watched the debris the river carried. He saw whole trees, ripped from the banks upstream, get swept along in the current. He noticed something crucial that the others, in their terror of the river, had never considered. The trees floated. They did not sink immediately. They were carried, tossed, and spun, but for a long time they stayed on the surface. They were servants of the river's power, not its victims. This single observation sparked an idea in Lor's mind, a concept so audacious and terrifying it almost felt like a blasphemy. What if a man could ride the water like a log? His first experiments were solitary and foolish. He found a large, dead log near the bank in a relatively sheltered cove where the current was slower. He managed to push it into the water. It floated, bobbing gently. With his heart pounding, he tried to climb onto it. The log immediately rolled, dumping him into the shallows with a shocking splash of cold water. He tried again, approaching it from a different angle, trying to balance his weight. The result was the same. He was soaked, shivering, and had accomplished nothing but looking like a fool. Borin and his friends had been watching from the cliffs above. Their mocking laughter echoed down to him. "Look!" Borin bellowed. "Lore thinks he is a water bird. Does the dust make you so thirsty you must try to drink the whole river?" Lore ignored them, his face burning with shame, but his mind was already working. A single log was too unstable. It rolled. But what if multiple logs were joined together? A single branch is easy to snap, but a bundle of branches is strong. It was the same principle. A platform of logs would not roll. It would be stable. But how to join them? He needed something strong and long. His eyes scanned the cliffs. High up, growing in the crevices where little else could survive, were the great, thick vines the clan used for emergency ropes. They were tough, fibrous, and incredibly strong. Logs and vines. A floating platform. A man-made island to brave the water god. The idea solidified in his mind, no longer a fleeting fancy but a tangible plan. He knew he could not do this alone. He needed help. He needed the clan's permission, and for that, he needed to convince Grak. That evening, as the clan gathered around their small, flickering fire, their faces gaunt in the dim light, Lore knew he had to speak. The silence was heavy, broken only by the weak cry of a hungry child. Grak was staring into the flames, the lines on his face carved deep with worry. "Grak," Lore began, his voice barely a whisper at first. All heads turned to him. It was unusual for a young, unproven man to address the leader so formally. "There is no food here," Lore said, his voice growing stronger. "The land is dead. But across the river, there is life. We see it every day. The herds are there. We all have eyes, Lore," Borin sneered from the shadows. "We also have minds. We know that Akig does not allow passage. The river does not allow swimming," Lore corrected, standing up, his nervous energy making him bold. "But it allows floating. I have watched the logs. They do not sink. They are carried. We can build a great log platform. We can tie many logs together with vines. It will be strong. It will carry us across." A wave of murmuring swept through the clan. Some looked at him with a flicker of interest, others with open disbelief. It was a mad idea. Old Alara, the clan's eldest woman and the keeper of their stories, shook her head, her face a mask of fear. "You speak blasphemy, boy," she rasped. "Akig is a god. It has a spirit. It will not be ridden like a beast of the plains. It will open its maw and swallow your log platform and all the men on it. It will be angry, and its anger will spill over onto all of us. We will die if we stay here," Lore countered, his voice ringing with desperation. "We are already dying. Is it better to die slowly of hunger in a dead land, or to die quickly fighting for a new one?" Grak had remained silent through the exchange, his eyes fixed on Lore. He had seen Lore at the river, had heard the mockery from Borin. He had dismissed it as a boy's foolishness, but now he heard the thought-out plan. He was a practical man. He did not think in terms of gods and spirits, but in terms of risk and survival. "How many men would you lose?" Grak's voice was low and serious, cutting through the murmurs. "How many logs? How many vines? The current is strong. Your platform would be torn apart. The men would be lost. You ask me to trade the lives of hunters, who we need now more than ever, for a foolish dream." "It is not a dream," Lore insisted. "With enough logs, bound tightly, the platform will be heavy and stable. With long poles we can push against the rocks, we can guide it. It will be difficult, but it is not impossible." Borin laughed out loud. "Guide it? You think you can tell the Great Maw where to go? You are a fool, Lore. You will lead men to their deaths." The clan was divided. The younger men, desperate for any kind of hope, looked at Lore with a new respect. The older generation, including the powerful hunters who were Boren's allies, sided with tradition and fear. Grak was caught in the middle. To stay meant certain, slow doom. To attempt the crossing was a gamble of terrifying proportions, risking his strongest men and an angry river god. "No," Grak said finally, his voice flat and heavy. "The risk is too great. We will send the hunters further east. We will dig deeper for roots. We will not sacrifice our men to your water dream, Lor. It is forbidden." The decision was made. Lor felt a crushing weight of defeat. He had offered them their only hope, and they had been too afraid to take it. The days that followed were some of the darkest the clan had ever known. The hunters returned from their long treks to the east with nothing. The women's digging sticks found only dry, hard-packed earth. One of the elders, a woman named Shona, died in her sleep, her spirit simply giving up the fight. Her death cast a profound pall over the clan. The slow death Lor had spoken of was no longer a possibility. It was a reality. The final straw came when Lor's own son, a small boy of 5 winters named Run, collapsed. He had been listless for days, but now a fever took him, his body too weak from hunger to fight it off. Lor and his mate, Lyra, could do nothing but hold him, trying to force a thin, lichen-based broth between his cracked lips. The boy's weak, shallow breathing was a constant, heartbreaking rhythm in their small section of the cave. Grak came to see the boy. He stood over the small, still form, and for the first time, Lor saw the leader's iron composure crack. He saw not a leader weighing the risks for his clan, but a man looking at a dying child and seeing the future of his people turning to dust before his eyes. That evening, Grak did not wait for the fire to be lit. He gathered the clan in the twilight gloom. "The hunt has failed," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "The earth has failed us. Shona's spirit has left us. My own pride has failed us." He looked directly at Lor. "Your words were true. To stay here is to die. There is no other choice." He turned to face all of them. "We will build the log platform," he declared, his voice ringing with a new, desperate resolve. "We will do as Lor says. We will fight the Great Maw. It may be our end, but we will not die in this dust, waiting for it. We will die fighting for that green shore." A stunned silence greeted his words. Then, a slow murmur of agreement. The fear was still there, a cold poison in their veins, but it was now overshadowed by the faintest glimmer of hope. Lor felt a surge of adrenaline. He looked at Gra, who nodded at him. "You will lead the building, Lor," the leader commanded. "Show us what is in your mind. Boren, you and your hunters will fell the trees. Your strength will serve this plan. We all will work. We will build our escape." The chapter was closed on their life in the valley. A new, terrifying chapter was about to begin. As Lor looked out from the cave mouth towards the roaring, white water god that had been their boundary, he no longer saw an impassable barrier. He saw a path. A terrible, dangerous path, but the only one that led to life. The dawn that followed Grak's decree broke over a clan transformed. The heavy lethargy of despair was replaced by a frantic, focused energy. There was no joy in it, only the grim determination of a people pushed to the very edge of their existence. The Great Maw, their lifelong god and terror, was now their sworn enemy, and they were about to craft a weapon to challenge it. Lor, who had been a quiet observer on the fringes, was now at the center of everything. Grak was true to his word, placing the authority of the leader behind Lor's vision. "Your mind has seen the path," Grak had told him privately. "My arm will help clear it." The first task was gathering the materials. This alone was a monumental undertaking. Lor led Boren and the strongest hunters to a grove of tall, straight pine trees a mile from the river. These were trees they had never had a reason to fell before. Their stone axes, designed for butchering game and shaping spear shafts, were clumsy tools for felling a living tree. The work was brutal. Boren, his resentment at taking orders from Lor barely concealed, attacked the first tree with a furious energy, his powerful shoulders driving his axe deep into the wood. The sound of stone on would echo through the barren valley, a new and defiant rhythm. Took two men working for hours to bring down a single tree. It fell with a great groan and a crash that shook the earth, a giant brought low by the persistence of small men. They worked for days. The hunters, their bodies lean and hard from tracking game, found this new labor punishing. Their hands, accustomed to the feel of a spear, were soon blistered and raw. But they did not stop. Grack worked alongside them, his presence a silent demand for their best effort. Lore did not participate in the felling. His role was to direct. He selected the trees, choosing the straightest and thickest logs. He oversaw the laborious process of stripping the branches, visualizing how the logs would fit together. While the men felled the trees, the women, led by Lyra, undertook the second crucial task: gathering the vines. They had to climb high on the crumbling cliff faces to reach the thick, woody vines, some as thick as a man's arm. They used sharp flints to saw them free, another slow and arduous process. They gathered huge coils of it, dragging them back to the camp, their own contribution to the great project. The building site was a flat, sandy cove near the river, the same place Lore had conducted his first failed experiments. Here, the felled logs were dragged, one by one, a task that took the combined strength of half a dozen men. They laid the first two logs parallel to each other on the ground. Now came the true test of Lore's idea: the binding. Lore had thought about this endlessly during his sleepless nights. A simple knot would not hold against the river's power. The logs would twist and the vines would loosen. He had devised a new method, a way of weaving the vine over and under the logs in a crisscross pattern, using their own tension to tighten the bond. He demonstrated for the others, his hands moving with a slow, deliberate precision. He threaded a long, flexible vine under the two logs, brought it up and over, crossed it, and then wrapped it around itself, using a short, sharpened stick as a lever to pull it brutally tight. The vine groaned in protest, its fibers stretching, but it held. It was a revelation. Borin, who had been watching with a skeptical sneer, stepped forward and took a vine. He tried to mimic Lore's knot. His first attempt was clumsy, but his brute strength allowed him to pull the vine tighter than Lore could. A grudging respect began to dawn in his eyes. This was not a madman's dream. It was a complex problem of leverage and tension. It was a new kind of hunt. For more than a week, the cove was a hive of activity. They laid down 10 massive logs, each nearly 20 feet long, creating a platform that was wide and heavy. Over this, they laid another layer of slightly smaller logs crosswise, adding strength and stability. They wove the vines, creating a dense, powerful net that bound the entire structure together. They worked from dawn until dusk, their bodies aching, their rations meager, fueled only by the desperate hope of what they were creating. Lore was everywhere, directing, solving problems, encouraging. He discovered that soaking the vines in the river's shallows made them more pliable and easier to tighten, and that they would shrink as they dried, making the bonds even more secure. The raft, the water snake, as they began to call it, took shape. It was an ugly, brutish thing, a misshapen monster of wood and vine. It looked less like something that would float and more like something that would sink straight to the bottom. The clan would come to the edge of the cove and stare at it, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. They had created something entirely new, a creature born of their hands and their desperation, designed to challenge a god. Finally, it was done. The last vine was pulled tight, the last knot secured. The raft sat on the sand, immense and solid. The next challenge was getting it into the water. It was incredibly heavy. It took every able-bodied man in the clan, their shoulders pressed to the wood, their feet digging into the sand, to slowly, painstakingly push the great beast towards the river. With a final, collective groan of effort, the front of the raft slid into the water. It did not sink. It dipped, the water swirling around the logs, and then it floated, bobbing with a slow, ponderous grace. A cheer, weak but heartfelt, went up from the clan. Now came the final, terrifying test. Would it hold their weight? Grack chose the crossing party. He would lead it himself. With him would be Lore, for his knowledge, Borin for his strength, and two other steady, proven hunters, a man named Tord and another named Kel. 5 men. They would also carry long, stout poles, their ends sharpened, to act as crude guides. The eve of the crossing was the most tense night of their lives. No one slept. The clan gathered for a final meal, a thin broth that did little to warm them. Old Alara, who had been a constant voice of doom, now approached the 5 chosen men. She did not offer warnings, but a kind of blessing. She painted a symbol on their foreheads with red ochre, symbol of a water bird, a creature that lived on the river but was not consumed by it. "Go with the bird spirit," she whispered, her old animosity replaced by a shared fear. "Do not fight the god. Be clever. Let it carry you." At dawn, the entire clan escorted the 5 men to the cove. The river was a roaring, misty beast in the morning light. The raft floated patiently. The 5 men said their farewells. Lyra held Lore's hand tightly, her eyes filled with a love so fierce it was painful. She placed a hand on his chest. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Bring Rin a new world." The 5 men waded into the cold water and climbed onto the raft. It dipped alarmingly under their combined weight but held steady. Felt solid beneath their feet. They gripped their long poles. With a final look at the small, huddled group of their people on the shore, Grak gave the command. "Push!" They shoved off from the bank. The current caught them immediately, pulling them away from the shore with a terrifying speed. Their little beach and the faces of their family shrank with alarming quickness. They were in the grip of the Great Maw. The first few moments were a disorienting chaos. The raft spun slowly, the world a revolving panorama of their old shore and the new. The roar of the water was deafening. "The poles!" Lore screamed over the noise. "Use the poles to keep us straight." They found a rhythm, jamming their poles into the riverbed, trying to steer the raft's nose towards the far shore. It was a battle. For every foot they gained, the current would drag them 2 feet downstream. Then they hit the main channel where the water was too deep for their poles. They were powerless, caught in the river's relentless flow, hurtling downstream at a frightening pace. "Hold on!" Grak roared, his voice a beacon of command in the chaos. They were approaching the rapids they called the Teeth, a series of great black rocks that tore the river's surface into a fury of white foam. To hit one of these would mean the end. "Left!" Lore yelled, seeing the pattern of the water ahead. "We must go left of the Great Tooth. Borin, Tord, your poles on the right. Push!" What followed was a desperate, brutal fight for their lives. Borin and Tord jammed their poles against a submerged rock, the wood screaming in protest. The raft shuddered, groaned, and shifted its course, missing the Great Black Tooth by inches. Water crashed over them, soaking them, trying to tear them from their footing. They were through the worst of it, but the raft had been damaged. 2 of the main vines on one side had snapped under the strain. The logs were beginning to shift. "We are breaking apart," Kel yelled, his face pale with terror. "We will hold together," Borin bellowed back. In that moment, his arrogance was gone, replaced by a pure, primal determination. He moved to the weakened side, using his immense weight and strength to hold the logs together. His feet braced against the shifting wood, his hands gripping the remaining vines. He became a living anchor. They saw the far shore approaching, a blur of green. But the river was not done with them. The current, as if in a final act of fury, slammed them sideways towards a rocky outcrop. They were going to crash. "Everyone to the front," Grak commanded. "We jump." They abandoned their poles and scrambled to the front of the disintegrating raft. Just as it struck the rocks with a sickening crunch of splintering wood, they leaped. They landed in the churning, waist-deep water, scrambling and crawling over the slick rocks, pulling themselves onto the muddy bank. They lay there for a long time, gasping, their lungs burning, their bodies bruised and shaking. They were soaked, exhausted, and they had lost their raft, their poles, and half their tools. But they were alive. Lore was the first to get to his feet. He stood, dripping, and looked at the world around them. The air was different here. It was thick with the smell of damp earth, of green, growing things. The ground beneath his feet was soft and rich. A few yards away, a small animal with a bushy tail, something he had never seen before, watched them with curious black eyes before darting into the undergrowth. Grak, Borin, and the others slowly rose, taking in the new world. It was quiet here. The roar of the river was a thing behind them. Ahead was a forest so dense and alive it seemed to hum with energy. They had done it. They had crossed the impassable. They had challenged the god and won. Grak walked to Lore and placed a heavy, wet hand on his shoulder. He looked from Lore's exhausted face to the lush paradise around them. "Your water dream was real, Lore," the leader said, his voice filled with a weary awe. "You have brought us to a new beginning." Borin came to stand beside them, his face streaked with mud, his bravado replaced with a profound respect. "Your log snake flew well," he grunted, the highest praise he was capable of giving. They stood together, the five of them, on the shore of their new world. They were bruised, battered, and had lost almost everything. But they had gained something far more valuable, a future. They looked back across the raging river at the distant red cliffs of their dying home, where the rest of their people waited. The first journey was over. But now the even harder work of survival, of building a new life, and of finding a way to bring the others across the Great Maw had just begun.